Hey there, Joey Klein here. In this session, we're going to break down trauma, essentially what it is, and also how to leverage trauma and what to do about it. I think that this is really misunderstood today in terms of what trauma is, how it affects us, and also how to manage it, how to recondition it, how to eliminate trauma, if we want to think of it that way. And so first, let's start by really talking about essentially what trauma is. At the end of the day, like if you're 10 years old or older, you have trauma in your nervous system, meaning trauma is essentially when we experience an intense emotional experience, right? Intense sensation, and our brain, our nervous system, deems that as important information to remember, and so it gets locked or it gets caught in our nervous system. And the reason that our nervous system or our brain is wants us to pay attention to these intense experiences of sensation in a painful sense and to remember them is for survival, to avoid them in the future. So it really is like the hot stove scenario where, if you go up to a stove and you put your hand on a really hot stove and you don't know it's hot and it sears your hand, you pull your hand away really fast. Let's say you're a kid. And your brain, your nervous system remembers that damaged the body. That was an intense sensation of pain that's essentially, critical to avoid in the future so that we survive, so that we're able to exist. And so even when you're not thinking about it, months or even years into the future, you walk by that stove and you're like, whoa, and you're cautious, even though you know it's not on, because you remember being burned, right? You remember that pain. The nervous system remembers that pain in an attempt to avoid it in the future, so that when you go up to the stove in the future, you're like, whoa, that's hot, that's dangerous, that could burn me, that could hurt me. I need to be mindful of this. I need to be careful around this, right? For me, when I was a small kid, one of the events of trauma that I had was I used to love dogs, I used to love animals, and I put my hand through a fence, like one of those, fences with all the holes in it, and there was a mid-sized dog on the other side, and it was barking and all the things, and I didn't understand at the time when I was, probably, I think I was maybe 4 or 5 years old. I was very young, and I put my hand through the fence to pet the dog, and it just latched onto my wrist, and it just bit me. It started just tearing apart my hand and my wrist. And I still remember that event still today, right? And then they rushed me to the hospital, and, it was all fine at the end of the day. What's interesting is, right, for years after that, it became almost like a phobia where I was terrified of dogs, okay? So growing up, I was terrified of dogs because my nervous system tied and linked extreme pain to dogs. And so if I heard a dog bark, if I saw a dog in the distance, if there was a dog around and it was in a cage, I remember I would experience this extreme fear and anxiety and panic around any dog. It could be a little tiny dog, and I was a teenager at the time, or it could be, a really big dog. Didn't matter because my nervous system associated extreme pain to the dog. And so my nervous system was trying to remember that because it was like, oh, I need to avoid dogs because that's going to mean pain. That's going to mean damage to the body. Emotional events are the same way. Your nervous system doesn't treat sensation like pain, sensation in the body pain, like getting burned or getting bit by a dog, different from emotional pain. And so emotional pain, trauma, again, what defines trauma is intense emotional experience, right? Where it sort of sears an imprint, almost like a scar, right? I have a scar from that dog bite on my wrist. You can see these 2 dots from where the teeth went in, right? Still today. It's almost like a scar in the nervous system, right? Intense emotional pain creates almost like an imprint or a scar in the nervous system where it remembers that pain. And so a lot of people today are walking around with scars around the loss of somebody because they didn't understand how to recondition that in the nervous system. And so you love somebody really deeply and maybe they die in a car accident or they die and they get sick or they have cancer. That could create that emotional imprint or scar where then we re-experience that for many people the rest of their life or over and over again or for a very long time. Emotional scars can be like somebody breaks up with us, or they have an affair, they cheat on us, right? They are with somebody else, and we find out about it, and our whole world is shaken, right? That could create an emotional scar. A lot of us have emotional trauma, if we want to call it that, intense emotional quote-unquote scar from different childhood events, like getting made fun of, right? Or having something embarrassing happen at school. I bet if you take a moment right now, you can think back to a painful emotional event in your life that almost occurs to you like yesterday, and you've tied danger or the sense of danger, either consciously or unconsciously, to romantic relationship or to other people or getting close to people or to dogs, like I just talked about, whether it's physical pain or to that hot stove sensation where literally you touched a hot stove maybe and you actually burned yourself, right? Maybe cars, you're afraid of cars now because you're in a car accident, right? And so all of us live with trauma. Trauma is not something that is not a part of life, is the thing that I really want you to take away. Trauma truly is a part of life. If we understand that intense sensation is a part of life, we can learn how to leverage this. And so I would even start relating to these sort of intense experiences of life just as intense experiences, not so much trauma, because when we have an intense experience in life on the other side of the spectrum, the nervous system actually works the same way. When we have intense experiences of pleasure, right? Like this is what addiction is tied to a lot of times, where you take a drug of some kind or sugar, right? And you have this intense pleasurable experience, and the body remembers, oh, this feels good. And at a very, very base survival sense, the nervous system is going, oh, well, this feels good, this is pleasurable, I need to remember this so I survive. So if we're in nature, right, you're in the wild, when you ate, you felt good. Like food and sustenance meant survival. Today, food and sustenance doesn't always just mean survival. It can mean, we eat for pleasure, right? But the nervous system doesn't know that. The nervous system is thousands and thousands and thousands of years old, so it hasn't evolved to understand that not all food is for survival today. Some food people just eat for pleasure, right? So like alcohol or like drugs or sugar or desserts and things like this are all okay to have, but when we tie extreme pleasure to those things, pleasure sensation, all of a sudden it creates that imprinting in the nervous system, and unconsciously we want to go back to this stuff. We want to go back to it. We want to go back to it. And for a lot of people, we link, like eating pie, right, like over the holidays, to connection and family gatherings. And so now you have this intense emotional experience and this intense pleasure experience that the sugar is creating at a sensational level, and then this stuff gets linked. And then we're like, man, I wonder why it's so hard to not eat sugar and have healthy food that I know is good for me, right? So these quote-unquote trauma events or intense experiences that create an imprint in our nervous system can operate on the fear-based side, painful-based side, or love-based side inside of emotion, or pleasure side as it pertains to sensation. Like when we fall in love, we feel profoundly connected to somebody, right? That's like a trauma in the nervous system. That's an intense nervous system experience that they will remember oftentimes for the rest of our life, okay? Sometimes we fall in love with something, right? People sometimes say this. I have a friend who just got his pilot's license. He's like, man, I love flying because it was this intense experience of feeling free and kind of euphoric, while he was learning to fly airplanes. And so it tied this intense nervous system experience to the act of flying an airplane. Or some people tie that to business. Some people tie that to family, right? And so intense experience is a part of life, right? If we want to say it, trauma is a part of life. Now, why I'm sharing this with you is because all of us carry trauma. I've had experience in the last 20-year career that I've had supporting people inside of transformational work, personal development. I've worked with people who have endured the most extreme traumas you can imagine. Trauma we just can't even believe human beings survive sometimes. And I've worked with them and I've trained them to not only not have that painful experience carried forward anymore, but actually leverage it to produce better qualities and outcomes in life, which we're going to talk about, how to leverage these life events here in a moment. I'm just sharing this with you because at a program that I conduct called Evolution, we do this, I do 3 of them a year, 20 people at a time, 60 people a year. I used to do 5 a year, and I've had thousands of people, go through Evolution now and tend, everything from extreme trauma from being in the military and in war zones, right? What we think of as like PTSD to, trauma, from like having one's family come apart and going through divorce and situations like that. Trauma tied to extreme abuse, physical and or emotional abuse, being treated in a way you just can't even imagine a human being could be treated. Trauma tied to things like rape and things like this, right? And so I'm sharing this with you just so that you understand that I'm not speaking theoretical here. I'm sharing with you what I have seen thousands of times over literally give people access to the freedom of their trauma, and also a vast understanding of what can actually reinforce it and make it worse if we don't understand how this works, okay? So most important, what I want to take, what I hope you take away from this short training is essentially what trauma is and how to work with it, whether you come to somebody like me to support you with it or you go somewhere else to just make sure that you're doing the things that are actually going to give you access to freedom from that trauma and a better experience of life, okay? So if we look at trauma as I just said, an intense experience of life that literally gets anchored in the nervous system like a reflex. It becomes a part of us, right? Our brain and nervous system. And so if we understand that, right, we got to understand how it functions in life. So the way it gets anchored is like if I draw a circle here, and let's say this, like anything inside this circle is what your nervous system or unconscious self decides is important to pay attention to and remember. And everything outside of this is deemed as not important or essential to your unconscious self or your nervous system. Because we experience all kinds of uncomfortable events in life that never anchor in the nervous system. They never get established in the physical body and end up looping, or we don't remember them. Like when I asked you earlier to remember, a painful experience of life that, is very clear for you, even if it's happened many, many, many years ago, there are things that, events that your nervous system chooses to remember, and it anchors it in the nervous system. And then there's things that are intense experiences or are uncomfortable or highly pleasurable that it doesn't really take note of, right? And that depends on each person in terms of their belief structure, their value system, what they decide is important and relevant, what's not important, irrelevant. Like it's not the same for everybody. Our inner matrix, our unique patterning of our emotions and our thought strategies and our orientation of life, value system is really what determines, does information live outside the nervous system or does it get anchored inside, right? And so I'm just sharing that with you because the sort of, how do we say, signs or signals that your nervous system is going to decide is important and therefore information needs to be remembered isn't necessarily the same for your brother, your sister, your friend, or other people, okay? It really is unique and individualized, to us, right? The more we learn what those are for us, the better we're going to be at leveraging intense experiences of life for our benefit, right? And so let's say something happens in life and, like you put your hand on the stove and it burns. Your nervous system sears that in the memory and goes, I got to remember stoves are hot, okay? Or let's say you cut yourself really deeply with a knife. Your nervous system goes, I got to remember knives are hot, right? Knives are hot, okay? I burned myself. Knives are hot. These are examples of that physical sensation, right? Dog bite. Oh my God, dogs are dangerous. Be careful of dogs. Now, the only reason that your nervous system at an unconscious level and very physical level is remembering these events is because it decided it was important to remember for survival, okay? Remember, painful emotional events can also get seared and anchored, right? Like divorce. Man, divorce, I got to remember this because I need to make sure something this painful never happens to me again. And I can't tell you how many people I've worked with through the years where they have a divorce, they have a life event like that, where they begin to live their life through the event of their divorce, meaning it defines the next decade or two of their life because it gets anchored and seared in the nervous system, in the unconscious self, and the mind is going, man, the emotions are going, the unconscious self is like, I need to avoid this pain. But what if that pain got tied to romantic relationship? Well, now you might say, I want to be in a romantic relationship, but your imprinting is saying romantic relationships are dangerous. The way you avoid ever divorcing again is don't ever get married. Don't ever get into a close relationship. Don't get that connected to somebody ever again. And so then we have this weird thing where it's like literally the thing we want, our unconscious self is saying we can never have it. And so until we learn to rewire this, the outcome that we're striving for may never happen. Sometimes it gets tied to money. Let's say you have some wealth, or for some people it's like they grew up really poor, and they tie a hatred to being poor. And the way they tie this is usually emotional, is like they go to school, and they're like, I've heard stories like this over the years. Man, I went to school, and I had to wear the same kind of ragged pair of pants and shirt every single day, and all my friends made fun of me, and I just said, I'm never going to be poor again. And they tied unworthiness and shame and guilt and despair and hatred to being poor, so they went out and they built wealth. But even when they became a millionaire, right, even when they built successful businesses, even when they created wealth in a way that very few human beings do, it's like they still felt that inner disgust. They still remember getting made fun of as a kid. It was still their driving force, even though that wasn't the reality of their life anymore, because that trauma anchored in the nervous system. And so here they were really wealthy now. They achieved it, but they were living every day in the fear of what if I'm poor again one day? What does that mean about me, right? And all of a sudden, it's like, man, even though I changed the circumstances of my life, I'm still in the same experience of my life, and it's looping again and again and again. I've worked with, sometimes it's like, man, we go to war and we see these horrific things that happen. We have trauma there. That can happen, right? So there's all these different intense experiences of life that get anchored in the nervous system, right? And so what happens is, now we have, like, let's say this is your nervous system. We're just calling this circle here your nervous system, right? And, right, then we have all of this. We're just going to call everything else as just like life events, okay? We've got life events, things that are happening, over here. These are just all life events that are happening that the nervous system doesn't necessarily pay attention to. They're just life events, right? They're just occurring, things are happening, and it's not showing up as, imperative or important information to the nervous system. It's just things that are occurring. Also, right, the way we relate to our life events determines what happens here by way of our mind and our focus. And so two things are happening. One, we're having an impact on our nervous system by way of just life events, things occurring, right? We go to our kid's birthday party. We, take a trip. We go to Hawaii. We take a vacation. We go to work every day, and we do whatever we do at work. We're working out at the gym. We do the gym workout every day. We have all these like life events that are happening, and most of them don't show up as necessary information, so they don't end up in here, right, in our nervous system. They just are experiences that occur. They don't show up on the radar, right? Now, the other impact on our nervous system is really created by mind, the way we focus our own mind and emotion. Now, this is the piece that's very important from a training conditioning perspective, because the mind and emotion piece is what enforces this and keeps it alive, defines it, or allows it to dissolve. So let's say I have this thing called dog bite here, like I said earlier, right? Or it could be a more emotional event like divorce, okay? Or I lose somebody I care about or something like this. What you'll notice is after we have the experience, it doesn't actually live as an experience anymore because it's happened. The event has already occurred. The event comes and goes. My dog bite or someone's divorce happened years ago, right? My dog bite, I was 4. I'm 40 now. So that was 36 years ago, and I can still remember the event. I remember the sidewalk, I remember the gate, I remember the fence, I remember the dog. I remember all of that. I remember the car ride to the hospital, my parents yelling at each other in the 1969 Charger that we drove in. And I remember being in the back seat by myself with a white rag around my wrist, like wondering what was happening, okay? I remember all of that. That was 36 years ago. But when we experience it as though it's happening, trauma loop, it's not happening anymore other than in our mind and emotion. And so where does the event reoccur is in the memory of the event, not the event itself. Now, this is very important for training trauma because if we don't know how to not focus on the memory of the event, then the nervous system keeps re-experiencing that trauma, and the more we re-experience the sensation of that trauma, the more anchored it gets in our nervous system, the more stuck it becomes, okay? And so what happens is with a lot of, we'll call them therapies or modalities, or just accidentally, we don't know any better, we don't have the tools, techniques, or strategies to redirect, is we end up refocusing accidentally on the event itself. And every single time we refocus on the memory of the event, right, we're going to call this the memory of the event. What happens every time we re-experience the memory of the event, we activate that in our nervous system. We reactivate it in our nervous system. We reactivate it in our nervous system. Now, if we don't know how to disengage this memory of the event, then this becomes our reality. This gets stronger and bigger, stronger and bigger, stronger and bigger. And so if you are trying to recondition trauma, if you're trying to free yourself of some trauma event from your past, and you're in some kind of therapy modality or training modality right now that has you remember the event again and again and again and focusing on the event and the details of the event over and over and over again, I would highly encourage you to find a different method, because all you're going to do is reinforce that trauma loop, and it's going to get stronger and stronger and stronger and more prevalent over time. And so the thing we need to do is we need to disengage this relationship of perpetually re-triggering the memory, the pattern in the nervous system by way of activating it through our memory of the event, our focus. We call this our focus. And what we've got to do is learn to or train ourselves to redirect this focus so that we are not focused on the memory of the event anymore, but rather we need to start to put our focus on an experience, right, or a positioning, or even a different memory of an event or interpretation of reality, so that we start to activate a different experience. As this different experience becomes strong enough, the nervous system is going to decide that it's important, and it's going to take it on itself, so that this now becomes an option. This new experience becomes an option, becomes available, so that we can focus on that and activate it in the nervous system, or we can focus on this new experience that we've anchored as the thing that we're going to activate in our nervous system. And so the way we do that is, hey man, I'm not going to let myself go to the memory of the event anymore. I'm going to go to this new memory of the event. So the way we do that is we reinterpret the event. So let's say this is the event here. We need to reinterpret the event in order for this to grow stronger and for this to start diminishing, right? Just like a reflex, right? Your nervous system is reflexive. If you've ever played sports before and you learned a movement pattern, right? I was a martial artist. Some people do tennis. It's like you might have played a sport every day of your life, maybe growing up, or maybe you were a pro athlete, and you got very good at that movement pattern. You could do it without thinking. As soon as you stopped engaging the movement pattern and several years went by, all of a sudden you found, I'm not able to do the movement pattern anymore because the conditioning came out of the nervous system. So it's very similar here, where we've got to create a new movement pattern, right? So a new conditioning, a new imprinting in the nervous system, and that's how we retrain this old event. Now, we can do that by a new memory of the event or by a new interpretation of the event, right? We start relating to the event differently. So as an example, if we're relating to a dog bite, you can say, that was the day that I became scared and, terrified of the world, right? Or we can say, hey, that was the day that I learned to become more resilient. I understood that pain did not have to define me. Or, man, I was a kid and I didn't know any better, and today I'm an adult, I know better, right? I am able to assess my environment differently, and that taught me to assess my environment. And so today, my ability to assess environment positions me to succeed, and I learned that through this event. A divorce, man, I learned that was the beginning of my new life, right? And that was the moment that I learned to make people important in a different way and to make sure I pay attention to and make time for the people I love and care about and don't take them for granted. Before that event, I took people for granted. I'm not going to do that anymore. So we can redefine how we relate to an event, which then starts to create a new experience. Where's the new experience happen? Right now, today. And as we re-experience the new experience, we now have a different memory of the event driven by our emotion in our mind. And so we start relating to the event differently. And so if we start relating to the event differently, we start to bring new information, new energy to it. And this is how we start to redefine trauma. Now, if you're looking at a therapy or you're doing some kind of training or you're following some kind of method, make sure the method has you acknowledge the trauma event, whatever it is, in a way where you're interpreting it differently and in a way that's giving you access to calm, peace, joy, empowerment, gratitude, something like that you want to experience. So that's what your training in the nervous system is: gratitude, is calm, is joy, is peace, etc. Now, that will work with consistency and repetition over time, but you've got to reinforce it with your focus a bunch. Just like we reinforced the painful experience of trauma a bunch. And so we've got to reinforce it. Now, the way you can change trauma instantaneously requires a very skilled facilitator to support you and walk you through this work. Eventually, you can do it on your own. But the way you make the trauma repatterning instantaneous is to work with the way the nervous system works, which is as a one-time event, not a repetitive event. You can, when somebody's willing and they're ready to do so and they're courageous enough to go to re-experience their trauma, is you can have a person re-experience their trauma, meaning feel the experience of that pain fully, let it be active and awake in their nervous system, whether that's sadness, whether it's anger, whether it's grief, whether it's fear, whatever that might be. It's an emotional re-experience. Have them experience the trauma, and while they're experiencing it, in that moment of the experience, bring them to a new experience, and then basically recondition the nervous system inside that new experience. Right? So it's like, teaching the nervous system, hey, instead of going here, you're going to go here, right? So there's ways to do that. That's possible to transform trauma instantly, where one moment the person had access to that pain and that experience, and the next moment they did not. But the key element that has to come together for that is the person has to be willing to feel and experience that event one last time and be guided to simultaneously a new experience within their nervous system, so that the nervous system associates that new experience with the event moving forward. Love, empowerment, joy with the event moving forward. Dog bite, empowerment, connect those two things. Now whenever I remember dog bite, I feel empowered, instead of dog bite and I'm afraid and terrified, right? Dog bite, fear or terror. Dog bite, empowerment, right? The divorce example, divorce meaning sadness, divorce meaning loss, right? Sadness and loss, romantic relationship. right? Romantic relationship, sadness and loss. Got linked. You've got to experience the sadness and loss. Be aware of romantic relationship in a new way, an evolved way, so that you connect romantic relationship to love and growth. Love and growth, romantic relationship. Love and connection, romantic relationship. Now, that's possible. It requires a high level of skill, but we've got to start somewhere, right? So the way we're going to start, again, if we break down trauma, how do you recondition trauma so that you no longer live with that pain, whether it's extreme trauma or more just living life trauma, right? Painful events or experiences is, number one, you got to get in touch with it. You got to be aware of and feel the trauma. Be willing to acknowledge it's how you feel. Number two, we've got to shift our focus from interpreting the trauma the way we do, the memory of the trauma. We've got to start redefining the way we're going to relate to it, relate to the trauma in a new way so that we have access to a different memory of the event. As soon as you remember the event as being empowering, your memory of the event starts to change. It's how the brain works, right? And so we got to start to create a new relationship or memory of the event so that we access a new experience of the event. Number three, be consistent and repetitive with this new memory or relationship to the event, and eventually you have access to that new emotion as your way of being moving forward. Again, to accelerate that process, access and feel the experience that's in your nervous system today, the imprint, the memory of that event, the imprinting of that event, that sadness, that fear, that agony. And then while we're in the experience of it, we've got to redefine it in a different way so that the nervous system learns new information. If you can get that to happen in a way that it goes straight into the unconscious self, straight into the nervous system, you've got an instant transformation of that trauma. Again, you can do this on your own, but this requires usually a highly skilled facilitator at first to support one through that and one's willingness to trust that facilitator. I'm happy to support you in that. Reach out. Evolution is where we do this work with trauma, but the reality is intense experiences of life are going to happen. And so in my opinion, we must learn how to train our nervous system in order to manage those intense experiences of life and make sure that they guide us toward the vision of life we want to fulfill if we want to live optimally and realize what's truly possible for us. Because one thing that is definitely certain is that intense experiences of life are not an option. You are going to have intense experiences of life, and your unconscious self is going to relate to them in some way. Is that going to happen on your behalf? Are you going to let that be an accident? Or are you going to learn to drive this force in a way that makes you essentially unstoppable at creating the vision of life that you aspire to create and truly become the person you aspire to become? You learn to train the nervous system in this way. There's nothing you can't do. And now all of a sudden life is no longer happening to you, but you are welcoming life and you are leveraging the events of life to take you where it is that you want to go. So thank you so much for your time. I hope this was helpful. Please know that if you're stuck in a quote-unquote trauma loop or painful experiences of life, it is absolutely possible to transform that. You've just got to find the right training and be a little consistent with it. Have a great day.